To be honest, when talking about parks that I'll be going to this year, Disney's California Adventure would be one of the three parks that weren't a part of my bingo card for 2024, as despite not visiting the park in over 7 years prior to my June visit, I would have the US Disney parks low on my priority list whenever choosing parks, since I was more interested in doing more thrilling attractions with coasters, along with the interest of traveling to more unique and foreign experiences for a more special and notable experience. Along with this, I usually am not impressed with dark rides I usually ride, since I am usually pretty strict or nitpicky with my own bias towards the stories that are created. So usually, at best with dark rides I've ridden, they do provide atmosphere and do provide a serviceable story, but nothing really notable nor engaging that I find from the scenes or interactions. Although I did get lucky where I was offered a ticket to the less significant park of Disney's California, which is California Adventure, and potentially got the 4 rides that I was most interested in based on a more thrill focus, which included the first time on trying the 2 roller coasters, first ride on Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout, and a re-ride on Radiator Springs. Now, when it comes to this review, I'll say that everything got 1 ride each, since we had only a half day to ride anything. Additionally, for the sake of organization and proper advertising, I've decided to split the review into 2 videos, discussing the roller coasters here, and the second discussing Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout, in order to leave less confusion when producing the reviews. Anyways, with my day, I've started with the park questionable choice for capacity and stylization. For those who thought a wild mouse would never exist in a Disney park or a Mack ride's wild mouse would be in Southern California, then I guess they've proven you wrong with 3 times for each. Anyways, Goofy Sky School is a Mack wild mouse located at the Disneyland Resort. The specific variation would open simultaneously with California Adventure as the modified version of the compact to mobile layout produced by Mack Rides, with this specific variation including more gradual drops, likely to appeal to a more younger audience. In terms of significance for the Disney parks, this would be their first of 2 Mack coasters along with Disney's only traditional wild mouse, since their other 2 were Reverchon spinning mice and Animal Kingdom when those operated. Additional to this would be the only compact traditional mouse layout in Southern California left, as all the other ones were large park models by Mack Rides, spinning mice that travel are defunct or are outside of Southern California, with Raton Local at Tijuana's Mundo Diverto, and Psycho Mouse at California's Great America being the next closest to Disney as an example for a compact mouse. Additionally, the original theme called Mulholland Madness would be a light theme referencing to the famous Los Angeles called William Mulholland, with the original iteration holding more of an immersive driving experience, with the coaster driving in the Wild Mouse segment while driving through stop signs and supports. However, the original iteration of the attraction would be rethemed to Goofy Sky School in 2011, where the experience was more about how Goofy teaches you to fly. Now, in terms of decoration, both iterations would have extremely light theming, where I've only seen road signs on the structure and photos of Mulan Madness, while flat boards showing what Goofy wants you to do to fly in a Goofy Sky School. Honestly, this may be the poorest themed attempt for a ride that I've seen for a Disney ride, let alone a roller coaster. Since out of the many rides that exist in Disney's catalog, there was at least some attempt to immerse or satisfy the rider with visuals that were more appealing than billboards and the ride structure. Even rides like Avengers Flight Force or Incredicoaster provide at least one animatronic, a more dynamic experience, and or a couple of physical props. Additionally, another roller coaster that also has some flat decoration on ride, being Riddler's Revenge at Six Flags Magic Mountain, attempts more dynamic decoration with more unique buildings and interesting sets, and that's a park that's intended for more thrilling attractions, where Disney is the poster child for decorated theme parks. Well, yes, the Wild Mouse may not have much space for any true physical props, but for a park that has high expectations for theming and decoration, while for a coaster that was more affordable, they could have done better in order to impress the audiences for a ride that didn't have any expectations, and I'd like to have seen an effort to attempt this. Additionally, the ride type also isn't known for high capacity, since the ride has multiple vehicles that seat for riders, which, while dispatches are thankfully under a minute with a continuous moving station, the accountability for many block zones could lower the hourly capacity. Now let's have a theoretical scenario not accounting for the amount of block zones nor trains, and say that the ride had 12 cars running. In total, the ride would have a max of 48 people occupying a car, whereas compared to the park's other roller coaster, Incredicoaster, it occupies 24 riders per one train, and is dispatching the train load every 40 seconds. Now, Incredicoaster has a significantly more developed block system, where the ride was more designed for a larger capacity like this. So a more fair example could be Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout, where the ride has the same 24 seats, yet only the two cars can occupy the shaft. And if the car not using the shaft at the moment is planning to board using the elevator shaft, then that car would have to wait for the other car to load, do the ride experience, unload, and position the lift towards the car that would be using the lift soon, which takes a more longer time than Goofy to finish their cycle. Despite this, Guardians obtains 3 shafts that add up to 6 cars, in which half of those could be loading throughout downtime. Meaning, if we use the theoretical amount of total seats on each attraction being used on the ride experience, multiply that by 30,600, divide by that the duration of theoretical time between guests boarding and unloading each attraction, the Guardians would hold 1,880, while Goofy Sky School is 480 passengers. Likely, Goofy's might be a lower number of vehicles running, along with the fact that I've timed dispatches more linearly, which most coasters cannot do. But my point still stands that Goofy's, despite being a lower time for the duration of being in the seat, suffers from a lower capacity compared to the bigger attractions in the park, along with both attractions commonly getting similar waits of over an hour. I guess if you're over at California's Adventure at Rope Drop, if Goofy opens up the park, then you don't have to form of skipping the line, then I guess head there first if you want the best chance of riding an attraction. But if the other lines in the park grow extremely rapidly in the first hour, then probably prioritize the bigger attractions over Goofy, especially if you already had ridden the ride before. Now, in terms of discussion of the trains again, I will say that even though I rode in the front, the back could give alright pops of airtime, theoretically, as well as when descending, I did experience a slight moment of floating, and the moment likely is more noticeable in the back. However, there is a more unobstructed view of the northeastern side of the park when talking about the location from the entrance. Additionally, the lap bar restraint did feel noticeable when riding due to the more padded T-bar, but the lap bar didn't cause discomfort. Speaking of, the ride interestingly uses a T-bar compared to my previous Mack ride's Wild Mouse, Coast Rider, along with an L-shaped bar on the Legoland Technicoaster, with the latter opening the same year of 2001. Regardless, the train did not feel comfortable, at least. At least it did. Anyways, starting off with a swift chain lift, the car quickly ascends the lift, which follows with a left turn, giving a good burst of laterals. Now, before riding Goofies, my expectations of SoCal Mack mice was set low thanks to Coast Rider being mostly void of forces, while being super slow. To my surprise, the ride would give consistently good laterals throughout the top section of the hairpin turns, with consistent laterals throughout the entire turns, along with a consistent amount of speed based on the no involvement with the block section brakes, slowing down the train down. Although other aspects could have increased the speed, such as a heavier car being present of 3 large passengers when compared to the average audience. Next comes a 270-degree helix that's unbanked. However, no laterals, unfortunately. Then there's some straight track that follows into a hop into the next block zone. And what do you know? The train slowed down here for us. Perfect. Next follows the next turn, giving alright laterals, and the first drop of the ride, giving the weakest and most brief pop of airtime that I've done. Then the train ascends to the next block section, lightly trimming the train at speed, which follows with a train turn that's into some more block sections, and then a turn into the next drop in ascent. There's too little speed to give forces, unfortunately. Then follows another 2 left turns, which sends the train into a couple of bunny hops before hitting the final brakes. Now, while I was surprised with the laterals that the ride had provided compared to Coast Rider, the ride still felt unbalanced and pacey, with the second half providing little to no forces, even a mix of some decent speed to slow segments. Additionally, the ride mostly concentrated on laterals, achieved in some way with hairpin turns, which, while enjoyable in itself, I would prefer to have more variety in proportions. Still, I would at least put Goofy a few spots over Coast Rider, and would place the ride in between my Windstorm layout coasters at 26 out of 46, at least for the time of recording. Currently, I would say the coaster would be a little bit below the Windstorm coasters, but in terms of the other coaster that might be above, I don't know, you'll have to wait and see for later's ranking for coasters overall. But aside from the update, now I'd like to talk about the strange choice of making a steel coaster look like a boardwalk coaster, or wooden coaster. So, cue Disney's attempts for some reason. The more significant coaster of the park would have been ridden after a few after, being Incredicoaster. This would be a significant Disney coaster in many ways. Built by Intamin, this would be a record-breaking attraction for the Disney company, by holding the largest drop and longest track length on a Disney coaster, along with holding the record of Disneyland's only launch-in version. For Intamin, this would be Intamin's only LIM sit-down coaster even built, along with the only Intamin multi-inversion model present in the United States, as the closest model labeled as one without using all the LIM gimmicks would be Zittle's Avalancha in Guatemala. Finally, this would be one of the longest non-mountain coasters ever built, being Intamin's 4th longest coaster ever built and the world's 13th longest coaster ever built. A truly record-breaking coaster. The ride also has a wooden coaster appearance, as the ride would originally be themed as a boardwalk roller coaster found in California, likely inspired by one or both Giant Dippers in California at Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk and Belmont Park. However, I'd assume that a launch would have been easier to attempt on a steel coaster, along with the easier maintenance compared to all wooden coasters, or that the park developed this coaster before Intamin sold their prefabs. which while the first one was sold in 2001 in Colossus at Heidi Park. Disney could have technically took multiple years to develop their variation. Back in 2001, known as California Screamin, would it be exclusively be a roller coaster with just thrills in mind? However, with the development of Pixar Pier in 2017 to 2018, the ride would go through a retheme based off the highly grossed film The Incredibles 2. Here, the ride would get a story about chasing Jack on this newly branded coaster to the Incredibles. Along with this, the ride would incorporate new red tunnels, along with a pre-show and light theming throughout the ride. Now with the external decoration of this outside coaster. I find the ride to look appealing with the white supports and track blending in quite nicely, along with giving a more aesthetically pleasing boardwalk coaster appearance compared to the normal launch coaster. Additionally, I also like the newer red tunnels, as coincidentally give a similar paint scheme seen on both California and Giant Dippers, and prefer the more vibrant appearance compared to the chiller blue tunnels from California Screamin. Now, while the queue doesn't really have decoration, there is some surrounding art of the Incredibles on walls and the arch, along with descriptions of the characters during the queue. Now, while at least the coasters offer something in the queue, I would say that the queue is a step below of Six Flags Magic Mountain decorated queues, as those rides do have more of an attempt at decoration, such as the DC coasters in the underground at that park. Anyways, on the discussion of queue lines, the ride is popular with guests, with the coaster being the only launch coaster and inverting coaster within the park, with the ride not appearing as intimidating. Additionally, with many people coming all around the world for Disney, with a younger audience being more accessible to this park compared to Six Flags Park, this likely could be first or only inverting ride for this people. So with the broad appeal that of the ride's 40-second dispatches, the ride does get over hour wait. Which, while I don't find the ride experience to be appealing to me, I understand that someone else could find the ride appealing. Now with the trains, I find these to be quite interesting. Even though these are over the shoulder restraints, I found these to be the ratcheting restraints that could give a significant amount of room between my lap and the bottom of my restraint and pushing up. With how light the restraint is, which I found this interesting, as a few rides felt like they had a freeing restraint like this. Very few. Additionally, no leg grooves exist on this ride, feeling more exposed compared to the other over-the-shoulder restraints. Other coasters that use the Gen 1 Intamin multi-inversion trains are Indiana Jones at Disneyland Paris, the former Cop Car Chase at Movie Park Journey, the Monte Michaela at Brazil's former Terra Indicana, and Supersonic Odyssey at Malaysia's Baraja Times Square theme park. This means that outside of Disney, coasters with these trains are hard to come across for the Intamin multi-inversion model. So I'm interested in trying to do more layouts using these trains, especially with Supersonic Odyssey with the an additional hang time roll and lateral snap on the corkscrew. One more thing to mention about these trains is that these trains are designed for backpack and loose articles to be placed on the train. As long as nothing is being held nor removed while on ride, I would have just advised that the ride doesn't have many moments of force. It's still unsafe and a potentially safety hazard if the ride forces fly out the vehicle and hit somebody if you are holding it, or just like keeping the objects more vulnerable compared to the stationary position, especially with unauthorized on-ride filming of phones. But enough talking and going on tangents. Let's get into the experience on row 11 of Incredicoaster, where after a super quick dispatch of 40 seconds, the LIMs in the station would push the ride out of two stations. It would have have a left turn leading towards the main launch track. Now, in terms of there was a brief building holding Edna and a teleporting Jack. Now, just to state that most of the theming, while it doesn't really take away from the coaster, feels way too sporadic, minimalistic, and small to demonstrate the story and concepts they have presented. Now, while I understand that the roller coaster itself is the advertising point of the ride, I feel like that the ride treats the story as it feels important to follow from the continuous storyline, and yet doesn't really execute the story much, along with the audio really carrying the attraction. Anyways, I'll get to those later. Right now, we have an initial launch of 0 to 55 miles per hour in just 4 seconds. While the element provides serviceable acceleration and force, might be kind of weak in comparison to the other launches, the launch feels pretty sustained in the back, especially towards the end of the launch where the full impact of the speed is present there. Which, while the launch wasn't really forceful at all, I can say that the launch is one of my favorites, as the acceleration does feel sustained, making this a unique and memorable launch. Additionally, I would say that I find all my 4 launch coasters from Intamin to have some unique personality while keeping the launch entertaining, which is why I find my Intamin launches to be my favorite so far, at least for the recording in this video. I have ridden Pony Express currently. Anyways, next follows a tame moment of positives when ascending the first hill. Then follows in the back is a hill where the element almost provides a pop of airtime. Just note that there's a static structure of Jack shooting lasers. However, I didn't really notice on ride due to the speed the ride was taking through these tunnels. Then the train ascends in the back, produces a lateral snap into the first of many block zones. Then the coaster descends, and there's this S-bend that only produces brief laterals. With switching directions after that, the train comes in contact with the only LIM lift hill created, where there is a second tunnel that holds theming elements of Alaska Girl trying to get a cookie from trying to get Jack, no, not Cookie, no. That's Mr. Incredible, as he's trying to lure Jack with a cookie, towards the drop. Now, in terms of the largest drop at being close to 120 feet, unfortunately there is no forces during this drop, but the ride at least gives some sort of speed. Next comes a S-bend ascending, which, while no forces here, does show an interesting transition of minimally banked to the left to a strongly banked right turn, while having the restraint size being present. The element surprisingly didn't give me headbanging with a quick transition like this, which was actually kind of pretty cool and forgivable. Now, with the next section, I'd like to note something. If you guys remember from my Arctic Rescue and Accelerator portions of those reviews, I said that Accelerator was the smoothest Intamin I've ridden with flawless tracking, although to this date I've experienced it in the back row with a little vibration, but it was better than Arctic Rescue, which had a couple of vibrations on ride. Well, on Incredicoaster, there's a few moments of frequent vibration that felt constant and a bit more rattly than usual compared to these rides. Now, for myself, this didn't cause problems. However, I could see this bothering someone that's not familiar with coasters or people who are more sensitive to these elements. Notably, the vibration is constant throughout the straight track that involves a block section, along with the vertical loop. Now, speaking of the vertical loop, let's talk about my first and only Intamin version prior to traveling somewhere else. Now, in North America, there's not really many Intamin inverting coasters that I can find. Other than Incredicoaster, the second closest to me is Flash Vertical Velocity as a Six Flags Discovery Kingdom before the opening of Fast and Furious Hollywood Drift at Universal Studios Hollywood, which Flash Vertical Velocity could not survive, may not survive, but who knows at this point. And after that is Matagani at Iowa's Lost Island. Additionally, not many locations in the US nor Europe hold many inversions on Intamins. So until I get to ride something like Zetul's Avalancha, then this would be the only one. Honestly, out of all the vertical loops I've done, this may be the weakest prior to riding the Big Apple coaster, as this is being the tamest and least consistent in force, along with the constant vibration. Now, while the Final Valley does have decent positives, but the other vertical loops I've done, like New Revolution or Adrenaline Peak, provide a more consistent experience throughout the element due to a more symmetrical entrance and exit providing positives and more hang time. Then there's more sustained and intensified forces with Desert loops, Batman loops, Viper loops, Canyon Blaster loops, Silver Bullets loops, and Boomerangs loops that provide sustained positives with more intensified positives, while Full Throttle provides decent positives on the valley, yet provides very intensified hang time for 3 seconds. Now, I get that the loop works in the park's favor for newcomers to the inversion, but in terms of my preferences overall and looking at this more generally, this is likely one of the weakest inversions I've done. Anyways, the ride ascends into block section 4, where a third tunnel is present writing the script and re-reviewing this months later, the line where I see like Violet teleporting to find and try Jack, I kind of hesitated on what those powers are really from either from memory. And to be fair, it doesn't. Maybe I haven't really watched the Incredibles movies in a very long time, but I'll say that because for some reason it's like the ride doesn't really convey much really well in terms of like, oh, is she really teleporting? And it's like, yeah, they have like, I get that they tried with the Scream tunnels, but in reality, if they actually it's like if they cannot convey what Violet's powers are in a way where it's like, oh, this is definitely clear, then I would say they pretty much screwed up with how to convey a message for theming. So yeah, what the hell? Then the ride likely has a little vibration when descending, and then ascending into the next elevated turn that moves up and down, which sadly doesn't give forces at all. Then there's another S-bend during the ride, but this time there's no laterals in the back. Once ascending, the ride ascends in the 5th block section on the course. It's to this point while riding that I've realized that the ride isn't providing much moments of force, along with the ride feeling like it just produces constant noise. You see, with the lack of thrills in theming, you still have a constant soundtrack playing with some Incredibles music with the wacky storyline and dialogue, which reminds me of the two launched looping coasters that also had gotten re-themes, with both coasters opening during the Eisner era that lacks in forces at parks where they also had an Intamin coaster. Huh. But I'll say that the previous audio on California Screamin was both catchy and felt unique to both a beach setting while having the distinction of Disney. Anyways, there's 4 forceless bunny hills in the back after this block section. Honestly, now that I think about it, maybe this ride was a front row ride, since so many elements require the faster speed when ascending. But I may never know. I'm not sure if I'm ever going back to California Adventure. I'm not sure if I'm ever rewriting a Incredicoaster. Anyways, the Bunny Hills provide many clones of Jack on sticks. That's barely noticeable on ride. Next is the 6th and final block section prior to the breaks. And next is the hidden helix, which is banked and dragged out enough to not provide laterals nor positives. Finally, the train hits the brakes, ending your 6,072 feet track length. Oh, in the easiest visual and most detailed scene of the ride, where Edna has a cookie for Giant Jack. Now, before getting to my general critiques, I'd like to comment that apart from the aforementioned restraints, launch, and the few forceful moments on the ride, being very generous with that, I'll say that I liked that the layout and concept and bends are varied in many moments, like the larger hills varying from the snappy transitions to the S-bends. Sustained turns in the vertical loop, the bunny hills, and helix all feel more unique from each other, gives a variety. However, I feel like that the ride lacks many moments of force, which makes the ride feel like that the ride feels too extended. It feels like most track there are there for the sake of filling time. Now, while I do like the elements that are provided with force, I feel like that they could have minimized their track to head back to the station after the loop. Might have included these forces. Overall, this would be ranked as the lowest inversion coaster I've ridden, at least for a coaster overall. I still haven't gotten to the Mind Eraser review. Along with the weakest Intamin based off on the lack of forces, the forces feeling sporadic and the extension of time. Additionally, I feel like I find the ride's theming attempt to be very pathetic. Kind of worse than the roller coaster itself, since the theming only has a soundtrack and unutilized, uh, like space and unutilized, atmosphere. Anyways, the ride originally would have been placed at mentioned 24th out of 46, placed in between the aforementioned Windstorm Coaster and Tidal Twister. To mention Tidal Twister, while the ride offered less options for forces, felt more repetitive and took a long time to get started. I feel like the ride attempts sustained and consistent hang time multiple times, which I found more excusable and quantitative. However, as of current day, I would say Incredicoaster now ranks 41st out of 61, being below like Revenge of the Mummy at Universal Studios Hollywood, but above Alpine Coaster at Glenwood Caverns. Yeah. Anyways, overall, even though I'm glad getting the coasters and even enjoyed my experiences riding them, I feel like the rides felt tamer and less consistent forces than what I've preferred. Which, while fine for your audience, I would say that these rides could provide forces and still be family friendly, at least more consistently. As Arctic Rescue feels similar in intensity of Incredicoaster, while providing more quantity and forces instead of the quantity and track. Still, would say the coasters weren't the star of the show in terms of thrill. Tune in next episode on the following day. Well, not following day, because this is going to take a pretty long time to edit. Well, a little bit. In order to talk about surprising themed drop tower in Avengers Campus. You can tell I wrote the script multiple months in advance.